I think that experimentation is a little like overrated. And I think that it is an excuse for marketers to not go forward in a bold direction, willing to be wrong and understand quickly from the market.
I'm Jonathan Gandalf, and welcome to the Content Cocktail Hour, powered by The Juice. Our mission is to squeeze out the deepest secrets of B2B marketing professionals to help you push your brand to the forefront of the industry. Let's raise the glass. Welcome back to the Content Cocktail Hour. This is going to be a fun one. I am joined by Mollie Kuramoto, Director of Marketing at High Alpha. If you don't know, The Juice is born out of the High Alpha Venture Studio. So Mollie's been a partner in crime with The Juice for quite some time. She's partially responsible, maybe solely responsible for making sure we don't get ourselves in trouble with our own brand or our marketing efforts. So she's got a big job on her hands. Today, we're going to be digging into the 2024 B2B SaaS Benchmark Report and survey that their team is running. They've kind of continued the tradition on from OpenView, working with Kyle Poyer and the Paddle team. So it's a report that I love and I'm going to talk a lot about during this episode. But before I do that, why don't I stop rambling? Mollie, welcome to the Content Cocktail Hour. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your role.
Hey, Jonathan. Happy to be here. So my name is Mollie Kuramoto, and I'm the Director of Marketing at High Alpha. Over the past 4 years at High Alpha, I've worked with all of our portfolio companies, helping them build their brands from the ground up, which is how I met you, Jonathan, building The Juice. I still remember when we were naming that company. So it's been a fun ride and awesome to see what you've done with it. You haven't broken it. So kudos to you in that regard.
Not yet.
Not yet. There is still time, I assume. But no, you built it into something that's awesome. Before High Alpha, I was working at a marketing agency. So I have a background in content marketing, digital marketing, and then I also worked at an e-commerce eyewear company out of college as well. So that's how I found my way to High Alpha. I am now currently, again, the Director of Marketing here. So helping lead some of our portfolio companies' marketing efforts, helping them, but then also leading High Alpha marketing in general.
Love that. We are big fans of yours and High Alpha. So thank you for everything that you do. Mollie, it is the Content Cocktail Hour. We always like asking our guests before we dig into the conversation, what are you enjoying drinking nowadays?
Yes, I did some research. And so I knew you would ask me this question. And I was like, oh my gosh, I got to give a good answer. But I am drinking right now a little Olipop, which is just from the office. I thought it actually had to be like what we were physically drinking at the moment. So I looked at our fridge, which is stocked with a bunch of different types of seltzer waters. Oh yeah. That was like an empty glass that you just showed me.
There's beverages all over my desk right now.
Yeah, I also brought just straight up water. So
Smart.
That's probably the most boring answer you've gotten. But straight up water, or I like to treat myself to an Olipop at work in the afternoons.
I love it. Podcast not yet sponsored by Olipop, but Olipop, if you're listening, now's your opportunity. No free ads. So let's dig into this piece of content itself. Right now, the survey is live. We're going to do our best to get this podcast episode out as the survey is live and get some responses. But that's really just step one of creating this piece of content. Do you want to share a little bit of the history of this piece of content? I know OpenView's ran it, I think since 2016-ish. OpenView's winding down. Can you just share the story of High Alpha kind of jumping on this opportunity to make sure this piece of content continues to live on?
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is a report that has grown over the years. It gets tens of thousands of downloads every single year, and it's a really trusted resource for SaaS founders because it provides really good, timely data in regards to all the SaaS metrics that keep them up at night. So Kyle Poyer, he was sort of the first designer of this report, and he worked at OpenView for a long time. I think he still technically does. But he's, amazing. And he has his own Growth Unhinged now personal brand. So shout out to him, and you all should give it a follow if you're interested. But they've really just grown it over the years, working with other VCs and distribution partners to get quality data. And High Alpha and OpenView have been friendly, and we've been fans of each other in the past. There's been some, obviously, companies that we have both invested in and alongside. And so when we found out the news that OpenView was not going to make any new investments, we really wanted this report to live on because, again, it's something that we read every single year. We get excited about every single November. And so when we heard the news, we reached out, and we've also been a distribution partner in the past, so spreading it to our own portfolio. And we kind of just asked if we could carry on the future of the report. And they were amazing and said yes. So we've been partnering with their team, Kyle, and then past partners as well to make sure that we're doing it diligence, we're doing it justice. And yeah, just continuing on the legacy of the report. It is like a really exciting project. And I think we're all just really excited to like make sure that the industry still has access to these data points.
I love the report. I vividly remember like reading this report, which sounds like the nerdiest thing ever to say out loud. But the company I was at before the Juice, like I remember our CFO there was like one of my very dear friends, and he and I would like talk about different things in the report, like huge nerds. But I remember like learning about like NRR, and I feel like this report was one of the first, it was 2018 or 2019 to really talk about like NRR is something that like matters in a really big way, and how to improve it and how to track it and benchmarks against it. So I did, again, huge nerd here, I did go back and look at some of the old reports. I got back to 2016. It's pretty fascinating. 2016, for example, was talking about kind of growing your sales team and full-time employees, like kind of that growth at all costs or until you see diminishing returns, which is how the software world operated back then, right? And then moving through the years, you saw things like PLG, NRR. In 2017, the report talked about profitability, probably 5 or 6 years before the rest of the industry cared about it. In 2019, the report talked about remote work before COVID happened. So like there's this combination of reporting, like retrospective, looking at what has happened, but also almost like predicting what will happen. So I'm curious, as you head into this year's version of the report, is there anything that you and the team are wanting to kind of set the table for, or any themes you're looking to draw on and kind of trend setting based on the report?
Yeah. So really quickly, before I get into that, it's not nerdy at all for you to care about this, Jonathan. You are like our prime audience.
There you go.
Yeah, no, not nerdy at all. Key trends. I think it is interesting as we think about carrying this report forward, because it's really two parts. We have, if you're familiar with the SaaS benchmarks, and if you go to saasbenchmarks.com, you'll get to the landing page experience and then the downloadable report. But it's equal parts metrics and benchmark data as it is narrative, like a narrative arc on trying to understand what is happening in the industry. And working with Kyle has been really insightful, just helping us understand how they've viewed things in the past. And I think one of the coolest parts about this entire project is that we get to take things that we're seeing in our portfolio and really gather a bunch of responses from the industry and see if it's just us feeling it, if it's just this company feeling it, or if a lot of different companies are feeling either these pressures against certain metrics, or even just like what's working, what we can scale. So for the 2024 version, our head is in a lot of different areas. We're still getting survey responses in, so I'm a little hesitant to share if, we come back and it's not true or it's invalidated, which is also interesting. But what we're looking at is a lot of go-to-market trends. One of the things that they've reported on in the past is that go-to-market execution is the number one thing that founders say keeps them up at night. That's above product execution, which is second, and it's above things like AI strategy. I think that every marketing leader, just executive, thinks about like how we're going to take this thing to market, and we don't really have a good solution yet. So we're going to explore a little bit more about that. Things like whether companies who narrow their ICP or broaden it are seeing better results. Also, understanding if companies who are creating new categories are growing faster or are seeing stagnated growth compared to those who are operating within an industry and trying to disrupt that area. So it should be really exciting. And then the last one is that we're also looking into founder health, which is really important. And I know that there's data out there already, but being able to actually marry that up with the SaaS benchmarks performance data and all of that, even at stage, understanding if, SaaS founders and earlier stage companies are way more stressed out than those at later stage, if that doesn't really matter. Yeah, those are some of the trends that we're looking to explore this year.
Yeah, it's cool because you'll get really interesting individual data points and results, but then to be able to tell correlation between different data responses will be, I think, even more fascinating. So I always think that's interesting, seeing how those things change from company size or
Yes.
margin percentages. I think it is really interesting. So we're all excited for the report. We're all participating in the report, but I'm curious kind of behind the scenes, you, the marketer, running quarterback on this massive project, like what has been interesting to you and kind of, I think we as marketers, you mentioned your background in content marketing, like we talk about the content treadmill, or I sometimes call it a content hamster wheel, which I don't know, feels a little bit more crude, but like we get in this habit of creating content, distributing content, going on to the next piece of content, create. And it's like, it's a very simple kind of create, distribute. This is gather feedback on the survey, create the survey, gather feedback responses, turn that into perspective, get more input, then figure out how to create the content. Then like, what are all the efforts kind of going into actually delivering this piece of content from the marketer seat?
Wow, I'm so glad you asked because there are so many. I mean, this thing is such a beast, which is incredible, but there are so many different stakeholders. And I would even say before this phase, it really was about thinking about the trends, what we wanted to unpack for the industry. So even before of course, a lot of the survey questions stay the same so that you get that historical information and data, but you're also thinking of what can we add to this narrative. You're thinking across stakeholders. So who has really good insight into the industry? Who can we pull some things out of their brain to see if, this is true or if it's not true? Building the survey, I mentioned this a little bit, but we are working with over 50 venture capital firms to help us distribute the survey. We're working with other brands, SaaS companies to help us create the survey and create content around the survey. So that is definitely serving as, again, the power of proprietary data is real. So that's giving us an amazing data set. And then really thinking about the different ways we can break up that content. Of course, we're going to have the report that's a downloadable resource, and then we'll have a landing page experience that covers a lot of the trends, but we'll also continue to create content based on those two assets and really bringing in even other data sources to help us tell a different story. So can we start to bring in public company data against some of the later stage companies that helps inform another opinion? Can we partner with influencers who cover a specific part of maybe the report and build new content off of that? So this thing is huge and evolving, and it's really exciting because, again, like the proprietary data that we can get from it can create a lot of different types of content. So we're kind of in that phase right now, but it's a really exciting thing to build our content strategy around.
I was gonna say it's fascinating, but you mentioned earlier it takes 10,000 or it gets 10,000 downloads, but it's like this is the amount of work and effort that it takes to get to that, right? And it's so like I love the way you're already thinking about adding to it or layering it. We call it atomizing the content in a bunch of different ways. You're exactly right. Like not only is this sounds like a full-time job for somebody, but this one piece can become your content strategy for probably the next 12 months until it's time to go on the next survey, right?
I think that doing something of this scale would be really hard to do just like if it didn't exist before. I know that a lot of marketers are like, oh, it'd be awesome if we had our own data. We're going to do our own type of survey. And I don't know for a fact, talking to Kyle, but I imagine this thing was a lot smaller in 2016 when they first launched it than it is today. I mean, it's just the result of years, almost a decade of work on this thing, building it every single year, getting people to trust it. And I don't know, I just think that needs to be said about even just like when you're going and creating content, like every little piece of it like builds to something that becomes sort of like great. And that's brand building in general too. Again, I've worked with a ton of our portfolio companies from like day one, like we're naming the company, and everything that you just like build around that starts to add to it. I think a lot of times marketers kind of give up too early on things because they'll like see one data point like that blog post didn't drive the impact we thought it would, or our newsletter, do people even read it? And everyone can feel that way, but I'm almost certain that people in this process have been like, is this even worth it? And
I'm sure.
It kind of is, but it's not something you just build overnight.
That's so good. I love that insight of like, yeah, this has been 8 years in the making now to get to this point. And I think you hit it on the head for all marketers across all initiatives. We could all probably be a little bit more consistent in what we're delivering and patient in getting the results from it that we want. I think that's really good.
Yeah, for sure. And I forgot another hot take I had, because I know you're going to ask this at the end, was that I'm not like anti-experimenting, but like I think that experimentation is a little like overrated. Like specifically that experimenting in some of your marketing efforts to give you the answer. Like I think experimentation is amazing, but I don't think that if you're like, oh, well, we don't exactly know our ICP and we're going to run this experiment to tell us our ICP, like so many times, those things come back either inconclusive, they're hard to get statistical significance on. And I think that it is an excuse for marketers to not go forward in a bold direction, willing to be wrong and understand quickly from the market. So that was just like another quick tidbit. And I think that like, I don't know, this is kind of like all over the place now, but I just think that great marketing is built on being consistent, getting a little bit better, learning, then just doing a bunch of experiments and that will give you the answer. That's not how it works in my experience.
Well, listeners, a little behind the scenes, Mollie was nervous about coming on this episode, and now I think she just talked herself into a second episode we're going to have to do because experimentation is one of my like pet peeves is the right word, but I think two things happen when people experiment. I think one, you're exactly right. They jump around and they use experimentation as an excuse to be inconsistent. And two, they run the experiment, but they never actually report out on the results or set standards for what is statistically significant in running an experiment. They use the experiment to get the answer that they want, or they never actually get an answer and they're on to the next experiment. And those two things drive me absolutely nuts when it comes to
I had no idea
marketing,
you felt this way.
Yeah, that's one of my hot takes as well. So one thing, Mollie, you did hit on this, like the using data, but how much has to go into getting the data. We talk to a lot of our customers right now. There are two pieces of coaching that we give most consistently right now. One's very tactical. People love templates, which doesn't have anything to do with this episode, but that is one of the pieces of coaching is people love content that is templates. The second piece is use data. Use your own proprietary data. In the world of AI, words being commoditized, the one thing that AI can't replicate, at least not yet, is your proprietary data. And this project you mentioned is 8 years in the making. You know, it's got a good foundation now, but what would you say to somebody who wants to get started using proprietary data in their content?
Yes, for people who want to use proprietary data in their content, I would say it does take a lot of time. So don't do it once and think that you've failed. Again, this thing is 8 years in the making. So I do think it's about consistency. And then I would also just say working with distribution partners, people who already have access to those communities, either in a formal way where you're like, you know, if you drive over this many responses, then you can be featured in our report, or just informally. Like a lot of communities and networks will want to provide helpful information and content to their network and users. So like a lot of people have just been willing to share our survey because they know that it's something that SaaS founders care about. So it's kind of like just another value add. So working through distribution partners and don't give up. I mean, if there was a silver bullet to this whole thing, I think it wouldn't make it as valuable as it is, but it's a ton of hard work. The last thing too is just, you know, working through influencers too. They're all looking for proprietary data. So like if you can have them tap into their literal substacks of like tens of thousands of people, and you can tell them you'll give them early access to the data so that they can share that with their network and things like that, that's been really effective too.
Yeah, and I think that goes to the trust point that you mentioned earlier, right? Because they've got the trust built in with their audience. So maybe the three kind of themes I heard there, or maybe the two, was one that, you know, I think a lot of times we talk about proprietary data and it sounds like that's like intrinsic or like internal looking, like we need to keep our data under lock and key. But it sounds like you guys are kind of doing the same, where you're willing to share data or receive data from places that would be good partners, which I think is like, that's an eye opener for me. Because again, I think about our data a lot. I'm like, we probably have customers that we could combine some data points with that would be really interesting. And it's still proprietary data. We're just kind of expanding the impact. So I think that's really cool. You're exactly right around data in and of itself carries some sensitivity. So you probably need to make sure you've earned the trust of what you are sharing and earned the trust of the people you're sharing it with, or it could get pretty sloppy pretty fast. So, and I think that speaks to the influencer's point.
Yeah. And I would say too, like for the benchmarks report, I mean, we need good data to have accurate benchmarks. And I think that over the course of, years and years and years, people, they built up the trust and they actually want accurate data in the report because it just kind of makes sense. So
yeah, people are making decisions based on what's in this report. I've done that before. So there has to be a high degree of trust in it. Okay. You mentioned you've done your homework. So the last question we always ask all of our guests. Mollie, what is one unpopular opinion you have as it pertains to B2B marketing?
I don't know if this is incredibly unpopular, but I just think that content distribution does not get the attention it deserves. To make it a hotter take, I think it's more important than the actual content itself. So understanding how people are going to experience the content, thinking through what channels you'll work through, thinking through if people will actually help you distribute the content. SEO will always, I believe, matter to an extent, but I think it's going to become more and more difficult to win there. And also for all of the AI perplexities, Google's already doing it. They're already showing skinny down answers. And so I think that the old strategy of doing evergreen content that, it's kind of more of like a Wikipedia type approach, which that used to drive traffic to sites. I think it's a different game and it's shifting. And I think that a lot of content distribution now happens through things like LinkedIn and obviously the juice. It happens through podcasts. It happens through emails and newsletters and all that stuff. And so just really thinking through your strategy to distributing the content is just as important. And for what we're doing with this benchmarks report, it's we're working through influencers, we're working through other VCs, we're working through brands, we're collaborating constantly with folks to try to get it to their networks. And what we are not doing is just relying on search engines to pick it up. So I think that content distribution is more important just to make it hotter than the actual content.
And the juice didn't even pay her to say that. I say a lot that curation is more important than creation, but it's exactly what you're saying. It's, a lot of content sharing happens in communities, in Slack channels, and I think brands need to think carefully about how their content is being shared and where, and create content that's easy to share in those places. And that curation experience is just as important, if not more important, than creation. So I love your unpopular opinion. It's very popular over here.
And for just the fans, he didn't even make me say this, but I'm going to pull out a memory, is that when Jonathan was thinking through this idea, it was before the juice was even alive. I was a marketer at a marketing agency, and he pitched me on the juice, the very first imagination of what it could be. And in my head, I was like, this is a really great content distribution idea, because as a marketer, I do think it's such a big piece of it. And sometimes it's hard to figure out where, some more thought leadership-y posts that have really great insights, but are not going to perform incredibly well in search engines, where those might live. So yeah, I've always loved the idea of the juice.
Love that. We appreciate it. Well, Mollie, if folks want to learn more about this survey, participate in the survey, or be sure that they receive the results when it's done, what's the best way to do that?
Okay, I'm so glad you asked. The best way for people to get information about SaaS benchmarks is to go to hialpha.com/2024 SaaS benchmark survey, which does have a dash in between each word. So we'll leave all of the links in the notes, or you can just go to hialpha.com and it's in our navigation as well to participate in the survey.
Fantastic. Well, Mollie, I have participated in the survey. I'm excited to see the results. We thank you for letting us kind of share the story of the report and being involved in some of the distribution here. So thank you for joining the Content Cocktail Hour, everybody. Until next time, we'll see you at the same time, same place. Cheers. Thank you for joining the Content Cocktail Hour powered by The Juice. If you want to see more episodes or more resources curated for your role, join us on app.thejuicehq.com. See you next time, same place. Cheers.